بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So, I just realized something. November 9th last year was the same day that we began studies. Last year, exactly. Or it might have been November 8th, but... So just to let you know, of course, I'm inshallah traveling tomorrow for the Arba'in Ziyara, and so our next class will be on November 30th. So just to put that out there so nobody shows up in the next 2 weeks.
November 30th?
Yeah, so we're taking off November 16th and November 23rd for both classes.
Okay.
And then we come back on November 30th, inshallah. I'll be back by then, inshallah. So, what I wanted to go over, and I know last year you were able to go over some of this in theology, was what we call the third pillar. I mean, if we're counting pillars, the third pillar, which is nubuwah, prophethood. And just to do a little bit of an overview, before going into talking about adl, of course, you also did adl last year, and then for the rest of the semester, if you've noticed, a little bit of an emphasis on imama and ma'ad. So what we're going to try to do is maybe consolidate those 4 classes on imama into maybe 2 or 3, and ma'ad the same thing. We always never get a chance to cover all the material. Sometimes I sort of stress on how much I should prepare, and then I realize I can't even get through what we've already prepared, because these topics are so expansive. I mean, and we're only here for 35, 40 minutes per class. But what I want to do is go over a little bit of, in terms of, let's go over prophethood a little bit. And, that would be nubuwah. Nubuwah. And so, which comes, nubuwah, the base of that one word that is related to that is naba, right? And there's a chapter in the Quran, the beginning of the chapter of the Quran, عَمَّ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ. So what do they ask about? They ask about a naba. And naba means, it could mean a glad tiding, and it could also mean like a prophecy, so to foretell something. And that's why, the person who delivers the naba is called a nabi, right? Naba, nabi. And then sort of...
So you said it was prophecy, or what was the other thing?
Like glad tidings, giving glad tidings. There's an Arab poet called Al-Mutanabbi, one of the most famous ones.
They were like glad tidings?
Well, yeah, but they also, some say that he claimed prophethood for himself.
Oh.
They say that, but he was a very, very good poet. I mean, if you know Arabic poetry, Mutanabbi is on top, one of the ones that are on top. So we're looking at prophethood, and when we talk about prophethood from its basics, why do we have prophets? Why did God send prophets? What is prophethood? And it starts with, because again, all of what we're talking about in theology is intertwined. So, and it's sort of one concept builds upon the other, and that's why it's important to understand the foundation. It allows you to understand a lot of the doctrinal branches, if you will. And you find that the basis for a lot of the beliefs come from one or two sources. So we're going to go over we'll visit something called lutf, right? Lutf. Right, when we say latif. And what this refers to is grace. And this is one of the attributes of God. Allah refers to himself in the Quran on a number of occasions as Latif, so someone who is graceful. And when you bestow grace upon someone, right, you are doing something for them, that you bestow grace upon them, right? Our parents in that way can be labeled as Latif, graceful, because they provide something for us. And they say that it is out of the lutf, the grace of God, that God intends to provide guidance for his creatures, for his creation. And when we talk about grace, we're not necessarily talking about an obligation. So, someone is not obliged to be graceful. And when we look at it like that, in the context of guidance, then we ask the question, is it obligatory upon God to send guidance? What do you think? Does God have to send guidance, or does he not have to send guidance? Any kind of guidance, whether it is messengers, of course, revelation to messengers. What do you think? Is God obliged?
Yes.
God is obliged to
It makes sense to the Creator, to his creation, to direct them a certain way, but he doesn't have to technically. But it makes sense in how we understand things.
So this also relates to the question of, is God obliged to do anything? I mean, because when we talk about adl as well, justice, the question is God just? And does he have to be just, or is he just out of habit? We spoke last week about habit, ada. But here's the thing. God says in the Quran that I have not created the ins, which are human beings, and the jinn, because jinn, also share in that they have will, like human beings, free will. And so they can either obey or disobey, unlike the angels who cannot obey or disobey. Even when we look at Iblis was not an angel, Iblis was a jinn, and because of that he disobeyed the command of God to prostrate to Adam. He says, I have not created them except that they worship me. إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, meaning except that they worship me. So God says that I created this creature with the purpose of having them do nothing but worship me. That's all I created them for, is to worship their creator. And so based upon that, then it would make sense for us to say that, well, if God his intention is for mankind and the jinn to worship him, then it follows that he sends some sort of guidance, something, right? So when we talk about it is his obligation to do that, it is his obligation because he has chosen to do something. It's like saying, I've chosen to, I've chosen to say get in really good shape. Because of that, I have to, watch my diet or go to the gym. I'm not obliged to do that, but because I want to meet a certain standard, I want to reach a certain goal, then it becomes incumbent, but not that somebody is forcing me. So because God is not restricted by obligations. So
I thought he would be obliged. I totally get where you're coming from, but I thought he would be obliged because of his adala. His adala is higher than anything else, and it's innate within him, right?
Right.
Like he can't even. I shouldn't say even if he wanted to, but it's not with.
It would go against everything else that we know of God.
That he stands for.
Right.
So that he is obliged, because then otherwise he can't hold us accountable.
Right. We can say that. Yeah, absolutely. We can say that he is obliged in that sense. In that it would go against his other attributes that we know of God. Right. In a very poetic way, in Dua Kumail, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, "Ma hakadha dhannu bik," So he's saying that that's not what I had expected of you. Because I know that you are merciful, because I know that you're compassionate. So if you were to throw me in hellfire, or if you were to put me among people who are mischievous or whatever, that I would not expect that of you. Ma hakadha dhann is like a certain belief that you have on someone, or a certain expectation, because God has sort of held himself to that standard. So that's why our scholars say that it's Al-Mudaffar here, he says, we believe that prophethood is a divine duty and a mission from Allah. He appoints to it those whom he selects from among his good servants. So that what he's talking about here is obvious. Is prophethood is to a select few, right? From those who are exalted among mankind, because God describes the prophets as being exalted among mankind. He sends them to the rest of humanity to be a guide to what is of benefit to them and is in their interest in this world and the next, to purify them from immorality, evil deeds, and harmful customs, and also to teach people wisdom and knowledge and the ways of happiness and goodness until they attain to the perfection for which they were created and reach the highest position in the both worlds. So here he's talking about a number of, basically answering the question of why prophethood, why is it necessary, and what is their role, right? And he lists a number of things. So he says to be a guide to what is of benefit to them, to purify them from immorality, and to teach people wisdom and knowledge and the ways of happiness, and reach the highest position in both. Well, that lays into the third one. But this is where they start talking about lutf, grace. Is that he does this out of his grace. Because God is graceful, he provides guidance and he sends guidance. So it's attributed to this specific attribute. And the reason why it's to this specific attribute, you'll find in other places this concept of lutf, of divine grace, it sort of shows up again. So if in the next class, if we get to discussing ijma', consensus, one of the basically proofs that scholars have put forth for the legitimacy of consensus is that when people unite, and of course there's specific types of ijma' that we're talking about, that when the scholars unite in something, that it is out of the gracefulness, lutf, that God does not leave them astray. So that if they do come together and they do decide on something, then that matter is basically, it's passed, because their consensus, God would not basically let them down in a way. God would not create error out of his lutf, and that's because of his lutf, because of his gracefulness. So this concept of lutf sort of comes up. I mean, personally, in the case of consensus, it's sort of tough to have it stand on just that basis, that principle. That's not an infallible argument, and that's why some scholars, from the get-go, they've rejected consensus. Ijma' is not really used as much as Quran and Sunnah and other things, but we'll go over that, inshallah. So what are their roles? He goes on to say the following. He says that it's because of his lutf to carry out reforming work. He says the following. We'll look at just a few things. Reform work. And this is a pretty interesting concept here, reform. So this is one word that can be tied to this is islah. Islah. And God tells the Prophet in a number of places in the Quran that we have sent you to do reform work, Islah. Shu'aib, the Prophet of God, says, I am here to do Islah, I'm here to do reform work.
So say that the higher level, this is the role of the prophet?
So this is the role of the prophets, yeah. So one is reform work.
And are they really reforming here, or is it there? Because I always think of reform as like change. Is it bringing back to the path?
Well, when we talk about, say, Reformation, say the word Reformation, even though Reformation, it means something like, because we've had a Reformation, people think Protestant Reformation, right, when we talk about Reformation. But what was the point behind Reformation? To restore, basically. And so in a way, the prophets are also restorers. They're constantly restoring because we talked about in Sharia, we talked about what the deen is one, but there are different sort of Sharias. But the job of the prophets is to sort of restore the deen of God, right? Even though there are different Sharias. There are different Sharias, and even, of course, within the Sharia, there is the prophets are also there to restore what had come earlier. So if you look at the Sharia, for instance, the full Sharia of Banu Israel, right, the revelation, that's hundreds of years. That's prophets, and some coming and some going. So it could have been that they had also restored the Sharia itself in those times. But they're there to reform people's understanding of God, because at every time, even though here's the thing, even though the Quran is talking about behaviors, so these people did this in the Quran, what is overarching above the behavior is their understanding of God. So if their understanding of God becomes solid, then their behaviors will also become solid in a way, meaning they'll walk in a straight path. So whenever you hear about, say, the Quran is talking about the people of Mecca, right, and just basically people in the Arabian Peninsula at the time. So you look at, let's say, Al-Mutaffifin. There's a surah the surah that's named after them. And Al-Mutaffifin are the people who basically, they cheat the scale. So when they're scaling something, say I'm selling something, I cheat the scale. I sell a bag of sugar, and there's sugar on the top layer, but then when you go inside, there's rocks or pebbles or something. They used to do that. They used to cheat the scale because people used to, go by the scale. And God says to them, "Waylun lil mutaffifin." So wail is like a woe unto these people. And whenever there is a wail in the Quran, whenever there's a woe from God, right, there's punishment. God is talking about these people being in the danger. But above all of that, so whether it's they're doing tatfif, which is cheating the scale, or they're doing other vices, there's always something overarching. So the Quran talks about their particular behaviors, but also addresses their belief that there are partners with God. And it's very poetic, but there's some sort of correlation between their belief in God and their misbehavior. That's what the Quran really is talking about.
So Reformation can be also then an update too. So let's say people were on the right track, they were following, let's say, what Jesus was proclaiming or what Moses was, but the change, the updates that happen also can be counted as Reformation.
That could fall into that category.
Because they could have been following the same whatever they preached, and but then you had people that transgress and change the
Of
ways.
course, and interpret a different way and followed a different leadership, and because of that, they had a different interpretation. I mean, that's also what happens when people abandon the correct leadership or different interpretations. And all the prophets that we look at, all the major prophets had successors, and in a lot of those cases, the successors were abandoned. And because the successors were abandoned, that led to different interpretations of law and different things. You know, Musa alayhi salam had Harun, and he also had Joshua to succeed him after his life. But most people did not follow Harun. The story says in the Quran that they in fact tried to kill him when Musa went to receive the revelation from God after being gone for 40 days. Joshua, same thing. The people did not want to follow him to basically conquer the land that was promised to them. Isa alayhi salam left behind Shim'un al-Safa, Simon Peter, but most people did not follow him. The community followed different people, and because of that, there were different interpretations. And even in Islam, when the people who the Prophet has appointed as his successors after him were not followed, there were different interpretations, and that's why we have different interpretations of law today and of everything really, of Quran and but then again, going back, the prophets were there to restore, and the successors were also there to restore, because when we're talking about prophethood, naturally this extends to imama as well. The arguments are very, very similar. The only difference you'll find is in revelation. That's it. It's in revelation. That the prophets and messengers, they have revelation. The scrolls, the books, everything which was recorded, the successors did not have that revelation. But that does not mean that the angels did not descend to them. So we have cases that Jibreel used to descend upon some of the family members of the Prophet after he had passed away. Not for revelation, but for, in the case of Fatima alayhi salam in Al-Kafi, there are a number of hadith that say that he had Jibreel had basically descended to her multiple times to console her and to also give her news, and that news was recorded into basically scroll, which is referred to as Mushaf Fatima. If you've heard the term Mushaf Fatima, I think we went over it maybe in the hadith. They challenge and say that the Shia have another Quran called Mushaf Fatima, but it's not a Quran, it's not revelation, it's a book of tidings. And of course, in their history, they have other companions that were, in fact, they actually call Umar ibn al-Khattab al-Muhaddath, the one who was spoken to, because it was believed that Jibreel had basically spoken to him. So it's not something really far-fetched. The only difference is revelation. There's a book, and with the successors there are no scrolls, there are no books, there's no revelation. And that's why it's so important to understand the hadith of the Prophet to Imam Ali. He says, "You are to me like Harun is to Musa, except that there are no prophets after me." That's the only difference, that there's no prophethood. In the case of Musa and Harun, there was prophethood to be found in both of them. And really the base is the same. Why is there an imam? Well, because it goes back to God's grace, that his guidance that he has established and intended for man is continued, and that there is no period left, that there is no, and this is something we'll get to, that there's no representative of God on earth. There's no hujjah of God on earth. Okay, so I know I went off on a tangent. Yeah, absolutely.
Unrelated but related.
No, please do,
So,
please do.
I've always struggled with the whole thing about the angels talking to the imams.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why, I guess maybe now I'm better understanding what you said. So is it that revelation would be defined as not so much that because of course the angels can't talk on their own. So
Yeah.
they have to be granted permission by Allah.
By
They
God,
speak
yeah.
on his behalf.
Yeah.
So would it be that message, say Musaf Fatima and so on and so forth, is that not defined as revelation because it's not a message to the people, but rather the revelation is an actual message that needs to be passed to the people? Is that how you differentiate?
That could be one of the differentiations. I mean, in that specific case, yeah. I mean, what was in the contents of Mus'haf Fatima, the specific contents, we don't even know about. We know there are ahadith which describe some of the things that's in that book. So, one of the things, and then of course there are other scrolls which are in existence, which are not the Quran, but they are also a product of revelation. So one is called Al-Jifr, one is called Al-Jami'ah. These are books which, I mean, if you read their description in the hadith, they are huge scrolls and scrolls of books which have details of the law. So what we understand from the law in the Quran and the hadith is really minute. This says that it even has Arshul Khadj, which means the following. Basically the compensation that is paid when you scratch someone. So you know how Diya says that if you take a person's life, of course accidentally, then this much is paid. If you sever a person's finger, if this happens, that happens. That if you bruise someone, there's a certain diya which is given, right? If you hit someone and it changes color, the books talk about this. But it says, the ahadith say that these scrolls which are revealed go into so much detail that it even has the compensation of a person who is, if you just scratch a person, right? Arsh al-Khadj, meaning, these small little minute details, right? So in that case, maybe the difference is one is to be revealed and the other is not to be revealed. But that's probably not the biggest thing that differentiates them.
They have miracles too, right?
Well, miracles could also be performed by the imams and the awliya. But then again, they're not even termed mu'jiza. When we talk about miracles, we talk about mu'jiza, right? Those are referred to as karamat. Of course, in the case of the imams, there are some who use the word mu'jiza. There's an entire encyclopedia. It's a few volumes, and it's called I believe it's called Madinatul Ma'ajiz, and it basically compiles a list of all of the miracles and the sort of supernatural things, if you will, which occurred during the time of the Prophet and the Imams, to each specific one. So even that is...
So like the Prophet has to demonstrate a miracle, like the Quran or...
Generally, yeah, messengers do, but we don't know of every single prophet. We don't know the case of every single prophet. But we do know Musa, we know Isa, we know our own prophet, we know other prophets, Nuh, for instance, or Ibrahim, that miracles were also performed for them. But we don't know about all of them. So, again, that's possibly one of those things, but it could be shared by... We even have stories that not just the imams, but relatives of the imams, mothers of the imams, and things happening for them. There's a hadith that says that the mother of Al-Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was sitting, and back then, structures weren't as sturdy as they were today, so walls would collapse and things like that. And she was sitting by a wall, and it began to collapse, and she noticed it, and she was sitting under the wall, and she said to the wall, she said, "Qif," meaning stop, and it halted, and she moved out of the way, and then it collapsed after that. An authentic hadith in Al-Kafi. So these things happen not only to the prophets and the imams, but those who are close to them as well. So, but that's a good question. Miracles?
Certain types of miracles.
Certain types of miracles, certain degrees of miracles, absolutely. I mean, those that are really meant there to prove the prophethood. I mean, those that are sort of put on display, such as Musa displaying the staff turning into a serpent, or striking the staff and it splitting the sea, or Isa displaying to his disciples being able to address the dead, or to be able to cure leprosy, or to walk on water, right? And the Prophet, again, displaying the splitting of the moon. And there are a lot of questions. That's actually one sort of fascinating subject. And this can also fall into the category of, theology and doctrinal beliefs. Is what do we believe in terms of miracle? What is a miracle? Is it are they illusions, or is it something which is happening, which is supernatural, and how do we define that? Because some things are, it's sort of almost unexplainable as to how could a staff turn into a serpent, or how could the moon split? There's no crack in the moon right now, right? So that those are also fascinating questions. Okay. Any questions so far on the role of prophethood or anything like that, or should we move forward? Okay, so so that's one thing that they do, is reform work. Another is that they are intermediaries, right? So intermediaries between God and His creation. And that they deliver the message that God has intended to His creatures. Because God does not speak directly to everybody. God speaks directly to, a number of people. And those are His prophets.
So say all the same rules here that you're going through with the roles apply for the jinn and the ins, right? Both together, they're considered together?
Yeah, because
so is it that they understand the same language? Like, can they understand the language of the Quran, or?
highly likely. Surah Al-Jinn actually begins talking about that. So it's said that Surah Al-Jinn was revealed when the Prophet went to Ta'if to gain the support of the people, because the people of Mecca had not supported him. So he went and he sat under the shade of a tree, and he was brought grapes by a Christian servant, Addas, who had an exchange with the Prophet, and he sort of recognized some of the signs of prophethood from the Prophet, because the Prophet began to tell him things. And then as he was sitting, he was reciting some of the verses of the Quran, and it says a group of jinn passed by. And that's why the beginning of Surah Al-Jinn talks about a group of jinn passing by, them hearing revelation, and then them commenting on that revelation, that we heard what they call Quran and Ajaba. Quran, something is being recited. Ajab is something which is, we say ajib, right? Something which is sort of extraordinary, bizarre or extraordinary. But not in a bad way, in a way that, it's astounding, something which is astounding. And their sort of conversation. So it's highly possible, that they hear that, because the Prophet would be reciting in Arabic, in the original language, so that they understand the language in the same way that we understand the language as well. In the world of jinn, and it's sort of interesting, we don't know a whole lot. I mean, there are stories of some exchanges between people and the jinn, but we know this much, that they are, and Surah Al-Jinn talks about this as well. It says, among us are the believers, and among us are the non-believers as well. Sort of following the same trajectory or path as human beings.
Were jinns mentioned at all in the Bible, like during the Musa or Nabi Isa's times, or those?
No, they don't believe in the
I don't-
Christians and the Jews don't
I don't-
believe in jinns.
I don't think so. No, I don't think they believe in the
I've
jinn.
had discussion with them, they don't believe
Yeah,
in jinns. No.
yeah. I mean, they believe in, of course, the Lucifer. They believe in, which is the name for Iblis.
It's an angel that was. They believe he was an angel.
They believe he was an angel. Yeah, sort of a fallen angel. There's an interesting show actually on the History Channel that appears every once in a while about the belief in the afterlife and hell. and they give the different perspectives from the different faiths. So yeah, he's considered a fallen angel, but not a, you know.
So the concept of fallen angel is they decide that they don't want to.
Right, they don't want to obey God, they don't want to worship God, and so.
How do they do that if they don't have a choice?
Well, I mean, that's in our theology. In their theology, that doesn't apply. And he has a gang, you know, in their theology. And the Quran talks about shayateen, more than one shaitan. You know, there are jinn and human beings that are like shayateen, that sort of, you know, mischievous. You know, when you talk about shaitan, you think mischief. Even in our language, both in Farsi and Arabic and maybe in Urdu as well, if you want to talk about a mischievous person, like a mischievous kid, you call him a shaitan. He's mischievous. So the Quran is saying that shayateen are just mischievous. They're there to misguide, and that can be an angel, well, not in our case, but in their case, or it could be a jinn, or it could be a human being. A human being can choose to misguide others.
Yeah, and I love how we use the jinn as excuses. Like,
Yeah.
being bad.
Yeah.
The best of jinn.
Right. That's another discussion, that the jinn actually take over someone, and can they have control over someone, and if they can, you know, that's a huge discussion. A lot of people sort of, you know, have their opinions on that. Okay, so we only have a few minutes, so there's a few things that I wanted to talk about, but let's sort of narrow it down. Here's something. So we've already gone over, okay, that the prophet is chosen by God, not chosen by man. Man does not dispute the rule of God. But let's talk about this. The concept of there never being a time where there is no prophet or where there is no guidance. What do you think about that? Does that make sense? Or do you think there could be a time period where there is no prophet or no guidance, no hujjah?
It does say in the Quran something about جَعَلْنَاهُ خَلِيفَةُ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ, which may mean there will always be a Khalifa at some point in time.
Yeah. So it's used in the language that it is ever present. But what about, well, we know that prophets don't always exist, because the last prophet was our prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is 1400 years ago. But the concept, again, if we relate the concept of prophethood to the fact that if we can, establish that relation and trace it back to the concept of, because of God's grace there will always be guidance, then we can say in one form of another there will be guidance. So it may not be a prophet, it could be, it could be the imam, or it could be a representative. And one of the arguments that I've heard is that even when there was one human being on earth, there was a prophet. Or not on earth, but in creation, there was a prophet. And when they were two, one of them was a prophet. And that question comes up because a lot of people ask the question of right now, what is our role towards the imam of our time? Because the imam of our time is considered the hujjah, the proof of, or the authority of God upon his earth. And some people sort of ask the question, well, do we even need that right now with the existence of the Quran and with what we know? Do we need someone who is present but we do not have direct access to him? That question comes up a lot from young people, and it's an important question to address. And the way I've thought of it is that even at the time that there were only two people, one of them was a representative. And that's how God shows that there always is a representative. The first being himself was a representative. So what do you think about that? I mean, do you think we can go at a time where there are no... Because one argument that they bring is, they say, look at the time between Isa and the prophet, 600 years of no prophets. What do we do with that?
There was no global prophets, but weren't there local prophets?
We don't know.
Really?
We know that Isa had successors and executors, and one succeeded the other. We talked about last week in the story of Salman, how he sort of followed those people, and a lot of them had long lives. They lived, so that 600-year period was sort of covered. So some ahadith even narrate the age of Salman to be around 250 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. Some say around, past 100, 150 years old. It was very...
What do we consider Yahya then? Because Yahya was between that time. What would we consider him?
Yeah, but Yahya was also, Yahya was also martyred soon after. Yahya did not live. He was martyred by Banu Israel. They actually beheaded him and put his head on display, and he's actually buried in, I believe in Damascus, if I'm not wrong.
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, yeah, Yahya, yeah, John the Baptist.
But it was like 124,000 prophets, right? Was it 124,000? I mean, yeah, how do you know, like, if none existed between Jesus and...
Well, the language that Jesus uses in the Quran, that the one that will come after me is Ahmed.
But after me doesn't necessarily have to be the next person. It could be...
Possibly.
Global.
Possibly.
Like Ulil Azm, they call them, the five...
Well, those five, no. Those five we're talking about, by that time, there are, because the Prophet is one of those five, and then no one else between Isa and the Prophet is mentioned among those five. So it's, you have the Prophet, you have Isa, Musa, Nuh, and Ibrahim. Those are the five Ulul Azm. Yeah. Okay, so we'll end for now. صلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.